Thousands of years go by as the Crown builds a planet of machines. A central maw eats organic life to sustain the Empire, and an entire population of machines march to feed it. But something goes wrong. The human begins to feel again, and the machines stop operating correctly. Over time, the man begins to separate himself from the leeching crown upon his head, causing him to further and further realize the terrible things that have occurred by his own hand. In an attempt to reclaim his old self and give the world another chance at life, he thrusts the relic into the center of the machine. The maw of destruction collapses in on itself, and the entire empire crumbles. The man, now free of his crown, plummets to his death. The relic falls into the center of the earth, buried deep beneath the dirt, where it will sit and wait for thousands of years, until one day organic life takes over again, and an unknowing man hears that same calling.
The name Decline comes from the imminent decline of human spirit. That's why we kind of went with the name Eternal Meditations of a Deathless Crown, because the first song in the imminent decline is meditation, so we thought that kind of connection between the albums would, like the two albums are very much tied together, so we wanted to kind of tie the names together a little bit too. These two albums are very much reflections of each other, so I think Decline is kind of just setting that up, just taking the very last bit of album one and doing it again, but in this new way, this transformed way, to kind of represent the transformation that the earth has undergone, but also just to establish that this isn't a new story, this is a continuation, this is very much tied into what we were doing with the first album.
You have the same motif, the same little section that was at the very end of Cold Dead World again, and instead of being on like an acoustic guitar, it's it's an electric guitar, and it's heavier and it's more crushing and machine-like and more rigid.
It almost shows the growth of the Empire.
It pretty much just sets the scene. It's like very cinematic, and you just sort of see like sort of what we envision is like basically like this war-torn, like damaged landscape.
Cables and wires and metallic slate and all kinds of machinery style things.
I imagine the beginning is like in movies where the opening credits are happening above the clouds. That's like the machine noises and rising, and then when the song comes in, that's you breaking through the clouds. You've got these creatures just grabbing organic life and marching it towards the Empire and just funneling it into the maw. A lot of time has passed, the Empire has grown, now the earth is like not fully ravaged, but it's a much more dark place than it was before. Most organic life has been annihilated.
There's little bits and little tiny sections of organic life that is left, but it's really mostly all being devoured by the maw at this point.
This song kind of just represents like the bulk of the annihilation that's going on. It's just a big machine that's being constantly fed with whatever organic life can be like scrounged up on Earth. It's all these wild machines just running across the land, just harvesting whatever they can find and throwing it into this machine, and this machine just ultimately, it's machine rising, the rise of the machines, you know what I mean?
The first album is a lot more melodic and telling a story through the melody that way, but I think the second album really, it focuses more on rhythm, and I think, even just the very beginning with you just got the tom part, and it's basically just scrapes. There's parts of the songs that aren't even notes, it's just scraping the strings just to keep that rhythm. And I think that really lends itself into this feeling of a machine world.
I think that's why we focused more on rhythmic parts and not necessarily throwing as many melodies as like the first album had. The first album's supposed to sound more organic with more melodic sounding parts. We really kind of decided to go a little more maybe into our hardcore roots, just driving certain rhythms home to represent the lifeless machine that is taking over the earth at this time.
Machine Rising has the first iteration of the recurring motif in the second album, the same way that we had something that repeated throughout multiple songs in the first album. We have that in the second album again. Yeah, the Doom riff.
Big fan of Donkey Kong on this track.
It has this real sinister feel to it. You know, it's almost like a villain anthem almost.
Yeah, I think Machine Rising kind of just represents the Crown at its worst, essentially. Peaceseeker does a really good job at kind of just encapsulating the idea of the entire album all in one song. I like the name Peaceseeker because Peaceseeker sounds like a positive thing.
Yeah.
Like peace, like people, the idea of peace sounds like a good thing to everybody. To someone who's seeking peace sounds like they're seeking a good thing, but it's not. It's peace through annihilation. It's peace through destruction. So it's I'm gonna find my peace through getting rid of everything else that there is except for me and what I want and my monument that I'm building. At the beginning of the song he says feed the machine, and I think that itself paints a good picture. But then when that part comes back later in the song, it's after you're sitting there repeating, you know, the machine eats your pain. So then when you hear feed the machine again, it's almost like this realization, just like, oh, I get it. Like, it's basically just telling you to suffer. The machine eats your pain, feed the machine. Like, it's just feed it your pain. It wants you to suffer so that it can survive. So it's not even just that it wants to destroy everything. It wants you to not enjoy that it's happening. It almost feeds on the pain of organic life as much as it feeds on organic life itself.
Whenever I say feed the machine eats your pain, that always, to me, it meant that when you like if you're feeding all this organic matter to the machine, you're losing all of your emotion. You're losing, like, not only are you losing your pain, but you're losing your joy and your love and your appreciation for life and any other kind of emotions. You lose it all. So it's almost like a trick, you know. It's like feed the machine eats your pain, but it takes so much more also. All it cares to do is to take advantage of whatever it can to be able to build itself an empire. The relic is using all of this energy and all this power from the organic matter to build a monument to itself.
Musically, it's quite a bit different. Inoperable is than Transmutation, but I think it represents kind of like the same sort of idea, like contextually within the album. Like it's instrumental. There's no lyrics because I feel like it's almost like this spiritual journey section of the album. It's almost just representing almost like the mindlessness that the man gets into. Peaceseeker represents like the action and the motivation, and then he gets so lost in that it's almost like he just lives in this spiritual repetitive sort of like mindlessness, you know what I mean? It's like conscious wise he's not even really there. It's almost like representing where his conscious really is, just in space, just in this endless void. I feel like this is just a touch of maybe the beginning of the human side of him starting to make its way back into him. Like, it starts off really simple, like you said, like kind of like a desert rock, real bluesy kind of sounding thing, and I think it's a lot more melodic than what we've up to that point put into the album. So I think that's kind of just like a small little bit of the human life kind of trying to reach out and get back to him. As the song goes on, it gets sludgier and heavier, and it's almost like it's nearing the man himself, because I think the next song after Empire is a lot more of like the actual realization of what's going on. I think Inoperable is somewhat representative of the human spirit trying to journey its way and make its way back to the man who's consumed by the machine.
It's this sort of machine being that the man has become, like he's sort of not moving as efficiently as he normally would be. He's got like sort of this like lopsided like gait to him. That's what the music sort of like, that swing sort of blues kind of feel. Like it makes me think of him just sort of like you know.
Do that again, dude.
Well, yeah, I think rhythmically, like it does start off with kind of a little bit of a swing to it.
I think what's important to realize here is that like from Decline into Machine Rising into Peace Seeker, it's all working at peak efficiency, all of it. But then in Inoperable, something changes, and that is that it's the human starts to regain a little bit of feeling. Or something goes a little bit wrong, and it all starts to fall apart. And that is what Inoperable is to me, is that it's like, it starts off, it's this nice kind of like bluesy vibe to it. Eric rips a sick solo. It's awesome, and everything's working just right, but something's a little funny, and then near the end of it, like things aren't lining up anymore.
Cool fact about this song in particular, Cody wrote the riff.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, I wrote the riff, and I guess you played it a
No, I
certain
didn't
way.
write it. I did not write a blues riff. I wrote a riff, and then Eric made it a blues riff. I think instrumentally we wanted it to sound like the song was falling apart by the end of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just this big, epic intro of just BOOM! It's a nice way to illustrate that the human kind of snaps back out of Inoperable and into this shining, gleaming machine world that is now his reality.
I think Inoperable and Empire almost like overlap a little bit. Like at the beginning of Empire, everything's still cool. The man's starting to question things and realize like the name The Empire Never Ended is trying to communicate the realization that just like, oh, this isn't, you know, like this whole story is supposed to be a cycle. Like this isn't the first man that's been in this position. He's not going to be the last one in this position. He's realizing this has been an ongoing thing for a long time, and he's just been caught up in it. It just gets darker and more disgusting, and I think it's the man realizing how dark and disgusting everything that he's doing and he's a part of is. It's at the beginning, it's like, oh, this is an amazing thing that we've created, and as the song goes on, he's just like, actually, we've kind of destroyed everything, and this is disgusting, and I feel terrible for it. But he's realizing what the crown is, and he's starting to hate the crown.
I always saw Empire as a big trick. It's the veil slowly getting lifted throughout the song from the man's perspective into what the crown's doing. This, you know, image that the relic is trying to portray to the man to trick him. And I think that Empire is it's him slowly realizing that he has a say in the matter now, and that he doesn't have to just sit there and be a part of this.
Platinum and silver line the streets of an undying empire, and then the next line is steel covers the earth, like umbral skies shroud the world and blot out the sun, kind of like the darker side of things. During the previous line, you've got like images of gold and platinum and these shiny, beautiful monument side of the empire, and then the next line, you've got the other side of the world that's been ravaged, and it's fields of rust and just oil everywhere, and it's disgusting. It's like the dark side of the process.
You know, whereas the first part at the very beginning is the relic speaking to his machine subjects, the ending is the man speaking to the relic, you know, cynical sentience embedded in metal, like you're saying. It's just, he's realizing now things aren't how they are.
It's the reclamation of himself. It's the man taking back what's he thinks is his his body, his consciousness. He and also trying to take back the world that he lives in, or take back whatever's left of it. You know what I mean?
The very first thing that is said in that song is "Purge this thing from me." It's a parasite. You know, it's something that latches onto you and just takes and takes and takes and takes. I think it's a feeling that a lot of people can really relate to. You know, that when you have someone or something use you and manipulate you into doing what they want or what it wants, and or at least something that you're not intending to do in the first place. And then there's that realization, once you're clear-headed enough to understand what's going on, that you're just like, well, I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to have any part of this. You know, this is an infinite regret to look at what I've done and to look at what I am. And it says I am a bastard son. It molded him and grew him into this thing that he really didn't want to be.
Realizing like he's played a major part in the death and destruction of everyone and everything organic. So it's almost just like the regret of, even though he didn't really have much control over the situation, he's still being like, it was done by his hands, even though he didn't necessarily have much control over him at the time. It's just his distaste for what he's been caught up in. Him up atop the spire, I imagine him just having this conversation with the crown where he's just yelling at it, expressing its hatred for the crown and what it's done and made him do, or he gave everything to this crown, and it literally, he's realizing it was all for nothing. The crown literally only had its best interest in mind. It never cared about the man.
I think at that point he really, it's the decision to cast it out and to throw it into the maw and to finally be done with it all.
Separating itself from the crown, reclaiming himself is to remove the crown from his head and thrust it into the center of the maw, ultimately destroying the empire. The machine empire around him crumbles, the tower crumbles, the crown gets buried deep beneath the earth, ultimately just to have the cycle start over again. But the man, in doing that, basically kills himself, but at least he dies himself like the human man that he wanted to be, and not this vessel for this leeching crown.
Those last few lines, you know, it's something that's directed specifically at the relic as like a final way of being like,
fuck you, dude.
Yeah, pretty much, you know, yeah. Really, it's him looking at it and just being like, I am my own self again, and I realize what's going on, and I'm not going to put up with it anymore.
Instrumentally, at the end of all of that, it kind of has this big moment where everything's collapsing and the man and the crown are falling, and then you get the beginning of Meditations again, and that to me is almost in the same way that at the beginning of Imminent Decline, that's kind of the crown waking up and starting to call towards the man. This is the crown going to sleep, and in my mind, like, it's such a big emotional moment for the man. Like he's so emotional about this, and he has so much hatred and so much sadness about all of it. But I still think the crown is so emotionless to every bit of it, even as the man saying all of it. The crown falls and gets buried and just goes to sleep so peacefully, knowing that was a successful cycle.
Yeah.
It got to do everything that it wanted. It built this machine empire, and the fact that it collapsed was exactly what it wanted. That was all part of the plan. I guess a lot of the action kind of dies at that moment. The earth is settling and in this weird in-between peaceful state before organic life starts to reclaim the earth and regrow, and then, you know, however long, thousands and thousands of years, again, you'll have humans and civilization until one day the crown decides it's time. It'll start calling again to another man that will then dig it up again, and it starts all over again.
Basically, it ends with the sort of motif of notes that starts off Meditations and ends with those, but they're played slightly differently, with a little hint of maybe something that might come later. Could potentially be another theme for another album, possibly. At the very end of this one,